I want to welcome everyone. This is our last history chat for the year, and we'll begin again in May of next year. And our guest speaker this morning is Keith Board, and he's obviously going to show us his wood carvings and how he gets everything ready, and it's going to be very interesting. So, Keith, I'll let you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming today. It's an honor to be here. I started wood carving when I was a kid. I'm not sure exactly what age. Anything that was outdoorsy was interesting to me. Fishing, hiking, camping, anything like that. And so one day I decided I would try wood carving. But we didn't have tools. We didn't have a garage or a workshop or anything. I grew up in a trailer on the east side of Gary. We were very poor. But what I did have was an X-Acto knife. And in fact, this is it, because I used to build model cars. And before I thought of using the X-Acto knife, I had a pocket knife. So once I decided I was going to try wood carving, I needed a block of wood. We didn't even have that. So I rode my bike around one evening until I found a construction site where they had blocks of 2x4 and 2x6 laying around in the mud. I was too shy to ask, so I went in the evening when no one was around. And I wasn't stealing a nice piece of lumber, I was taking something from their trash pile. So I ended up with a piece of 2x4 like this, and I had my pocket knife, and I remember sitting down and thinking, okay, here I am, now what am I going to carve? I had no ideas. So I looked around, and my mom had a flower pot that looked like a goose or a swan. And I thought, okay, I'll carve that. I'll carve a swan. So I started in with my pocket knife, and what I didn't realize is that the steel on a pocket knife blade is thick. And no matter how much you try to sharpen it, you've got to drag the thickness of that metal through that piece of wood, and it takes a huge amount of effort to pull that blade through there. It's very difficult. But I did it, and I actually carved a little swan out of a block of wood. I brought the block of wood home. I had to scratch the mud off of there and wash it clean, and then I just began whittling. And I was successful. I ended up with this little swan about that long. And I was really proud of it. I felt like I was, a wood carver. But when I look back at that now, it looks so bad. But you have to start somewhere. If you're not,
Do you still have it? Do you still
I did until last winter, and I got rid of boxes full of my early carvings because they were bad. And I was afraid that someday someone would end up with one of these junker carvings and say, Keith Board did that. And then they'd also say, that's not very good. And so artists do that. Anyway, so then I carved a fish, and it kind of looked like a fish. Well, then I moved up in the world, and I decided I was going to carve a deer. I thought deer were just so beautiful. And I hadn't realized that carving something with legs was going to be so difficult. Now this is pine or spruce, and it's pretty soft. But when I did the deer, I didn't realize that southern yellow pine is actually very, very hard. And that's what I ended up with. And I carved the deer with my pocket knife, a great amount of effort. And I was so proud of that thing, I just couldn't believe I had carved a deer. But when I would show it to people, they'd look quizzically and they'd say, now, is that a dog or is that a horse? What is that? If I was to make a drawing of that deer, it might look like this. That's about what the deer looked like. So I made a mental note that some adjustment would be necessary. But eventually I figured it out. And at some point it occurred to me that, you know, that X-Acto knife that I have, the blade is really thin. And it might be easier to drag that thin metal through a piece of wood. So I don't use this one anymore just because the handle is so narrow it makes my hands hurt. And now they make them with thicker handles. So anyway, now I can do this. Problem is I cut toward my thumb always because I can control that. And I protect my thumb with a piece of leather. Just like that. So now, if the knife bumps into my thumb hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, I don't get cut. But I carved for at least 25 years without one of these. It was maybe only 10 years ago I saw these at a wood carving show and said, hey, I need that. Until then, my thumb was always sliced up a lot. But when I would carve away from me, and sometimes I have to do that, it's completely wild and uncontrolled, and then the blade flies out and so on. And it's just very difficult to control what I'm doing. But if I'm dragging that little knife blade toward my thumb, I can control what's happening. This is what my thumb guard from last winter looks like. I eventually hit the strings where it's sewed together. I stitched it, I hit the strings again, so I taped it. So I just keep taping it, and then I can make it so it fits a little tighter and stays put. Anyways, I sat on my front porch yesterday and roughed this in just so I could show you a few of the methods. This is aromatic red cedar, so every little chip is fragrant. I just love that. And I'll pass this around. You should smell it when I pass this around. And if you drop it, there's no harm done. It's probably not going to break. Anyways, so this is how it works. Another thing, when I first started carving, I thought I was going to be lopping off gigantic chunks of wood, and it was just going to be, 10, 15 minutes, and I'm done. And what I didn't realize is that even with soft pine, the most you can cut, that's about the deepest cut I can do right there. So it takes some effort. And the carvings that I'm going to show you here in just a minute, most of them took me 30 to 40 hours to make from scratch. There are different cuts that I do. If I decide that a carving is too thick, I'll do what I call a face plane, where I just take the flat surface right off of there. And I've always got to think quickly, like where that knife is going to go. It takes a lot of effort to pull that knife through there, but once it comes out, it kind of speeds up. I've learned to keep the other hand out of the way, and I learned that the hard way. Although the worst cut I ever had was on my leg.
Move some of these out of the way from you.
Yeah. How's that? The worst cut I ever had was on my leg, and I was doing one of these cuts where I was cutting away from myself. I had a brand new pair of jeans on, and I zipped right across the jeans, cut through the jeans, and sliced my leg pretty deeply. So I've been cut, and I've learned to watch what I'm doing, especially watch my other hand and, protect my thumb. But anyway, like that. Sometimes it's really hard to cut in places like this where you have a corner but you want it rounded. So I do a cut that I call a curl, where I go in there and I'm actually twisting the knife like this. And no one showed me how to do this. I just kind of made this all up as I went along. Anyway, that's sort of how it works. And once I get the rough shape, then I can go in with these things called rifflers. They're like files, but they have pointed little teeth. And I can go in there with the riffler and I can start to smooth that out. But it's very coarse, very rough, so it scratches a lot. But once I do that with rifflers, then I start in with very coarse sandpaper and I just scratch it like crazy because it's bumpy. And I have to get those bumps out of there. So I'm like this. And a lot of times I'll spend more time sanding than I do whittling. So there's rough grit, and that would, if I was just carving this, there would probably be 10 hours of rough and medium grit. And once that's done, then it goes pretty quick. Then I'll use a fine grit. I have piles of little pieces of sandpaper like this folded up, and it's just like this, getting it smoothed out. And then I end with a very, very fine grit, and then I'll follow that with worn out fine grit to get it really smooth. But that's sort of how it works. And back when I started, let's say I wanted to carve a plesiosaur, a swimming dinosaur. I would take the block of wood and I would hand carve all of this away. All of this material I would cut away with a knife. Chip by chip by chip. And sometimes I still do that because it's therapeutic. If I have a very stressful day, like when I was teaching, I would come home and I would, it was a great way to de-stress. But when I was starting out, at some point it occurred to me that if I would take a saw and cut this off right here, that it might save me a few hours. But I didn't have machinery. I didn't even have a coping saw. But we did have a regular old dull saw, and I could at least cut off a major block like that, and then the rest was just hand carving. So now I could take a bandsaw. In fact, I have a bandsaw in my garage, and I could cut that exact outline. But if I do that, it takes away a lot of my freedom of creativity. And by the time I shape those fins, they're going to get really small. So a lot of times, I just take my bandsaw and cut off major blocks, but I still have freedom to carve. So let me show you what I've done. Let's see. I'll start with some of the old ones, I guess. This little rabbit I carved in 1978. The base is cherry wood, and the rabbit is cedar, and I drew it myself. I'm sort of proud of that because when I first started, I thought I wasn't an artist, so I couldn't possibly draw something myself before I carved it. But I did that. And it was one of the first ones that I actually designed myself. This little grizzly bear is one of my favorites. It was done about that same time. It's made out of butternut, which is a nice golden brown. And then I took a wood burning tool and I gave it fur. And you have to think that through. So the hair is kind of parted down the middle. It angles this way on this side, this way on this side, and I actually drew lines on there just to try to figure out what I was going to do, but I didn't follow those lines. I just wanted to have an idea. This bear had a fish in its mouth at the beginning. The fish was this way. And I know what a fish looks like, and it's not that hard to carve a fish, but I could not get that thing to look like a fish. And the more I tried, the smaller it got. Pretty soon it was too small, so I just cut it off. The base is tiger striped maple, sugar maple.
What year is that?
Pardon?
What year is that one?
I don't have the date on here, but I recall that it was about 1977. Last winter I did a lot of new bases on these carvings because they tend to tip over easy. And if they have a nice heavy base at the bottom, they don't fall over. So I like that. Back in the early days, I found it pretty easy to carve a decoy duck. So I did several of these. And to spruce it up a little bit, I decided to do laminating. I glued pieces together. My dad had a friend who was a mechanic at a motorcycle store, and when they would get Honda motorcycles, they would be in wooden crates that were Honduran mahogany. That's what this brown stuff is. And the guy would give me this crate lumber. It was full of nails and everything else. And then the lighter basswood came from a bushel basket of apples. My mom had bought some apples, and it had those nice thin pieces of wood. So I glued them all together and carved this little duck decoy, 1977. So then, ducks aren't really striped like that, though. And I thought, how could I use that stripe job to give the illusion, that part of the design? So I decided to carve a snail. I glued a bunch of pieces together, and then I had I had to keep shaping and shaping because this didn't start out as a perfect circle until I sanded a little more over here and a little more over here. And it was a challenge to get those perfect circles. But I did it. The dark wood is walnut, the light wood is basswood, and then there's a red layer in there that's cherry wood. And I don't remember where I got that, a thin piece of cherry. That's my little snail. Since I grew up in the region, sometimes I learned that if we would get a really bad storm, if you go to Lake Michigan right away after a storm, you could find fabulous pieces of driftwood. And so a lot of the bases are driftwood. You could even find pieces of old ships, pieces of mahogany with brass screws, and all kinds of really interesting stuff washed up on the beach. This is my hillbilly banjo player. I did this in 1980, and it's not my design. I was paging through a wood carving book for beginners, and they had it was just a line drawing that I made this from. So it's got my own design in it, but the outline shape came from a wood carving book. So you could possibly see this same carving somewhere else. It's made out of butternut, it's been stained, I wood burned the beard, and another piece of driftwood. That one's been a very popular carving. Mostly I carve wildlife and dinosaurs, but I did try to carve a prickly pear cactus. And this is sumac wood, not poison sumac, obviously. And I cut the tree myself. It was a dead sumac tree. I sawed it with a handsaw, cut it into little pieces of wood. Here's what they look like. It's very, very green. And it's sticky and sappy and messy, even when it's a dead, dry tree. But anyway, so I made the prickly pear cactus. And then to make the needles, I took a needle and I poked holes in the wood. And then I took toothbrush bristles. I cut them off the toothbrush. I had a little pile of toothbrush bristles and a pair of tweezers. After the carving was done now, I poked the holes. I would take that pair of tweezers, I'd pick up one bristle, dip it in glue, put it in the hole. Another bristle, put it in glue. It took me an hour per surface to put the needles in. The pears are actually the flower ovaries. That's the fruit of the plant, and they're edible. If you they have needles though. But I made those out of a wood type called vermilion that's naturally a dark maroon red. And then I have steel pins inside there with epoxy glue holding it together. It's probably not going to fall apart. I did that in 1992. See, those grew wild up in the dunes area. So we had prickly pear cactus when we grew up. This is an Arabian ibex. It's one of the mountain goats of the biblical land. The base is a piece of spalted beech. When a piece of wood is beginning to rot, it gets fungus that moves in. And woodworkers call that spalting. It's not rotten yet, it's still solid. But I got this out of a piece of firewood in my father-in-law's woodpile here in Bremen. And then the body is walnut, and the antlers are hard maple, sugar maple. And they did that in 1989. An interesting side note, I wanted it to be like it was standing out on a pinnacle, but it would tip over. So I had some wheel weights that were lead, so I hollowed it all out, and I took that lead and I cut it and smashed it and pushed it in there and glued it, so it's real heavy down here. And what I knew that lead was poisonous. You can't eat lead, everybody knows that. What I didn't know was that you're not even supposed to touch it. And I was cutting and filing and breathing and everything else. And the funny thing is, 1989 was the year that my hair fell out, all in 1 year. And that's one of the two symptoms of lead poisoning, actually. So,
Wow.
but I survived. But so I try not to handle that lead anymore. Live and learn. When I was in college, I worked on a farm for Martha and Herbert Wolf, and in the 1970s, they were about 80 years old. They were pioneer farmers. And they still had a coal stove in their house. They cooked on a wood stove in the kitchen. They pumped their water outside, and I got to experience that in the summer, and I loved it because I was a city kid. But anyways, I would take my carvings and show them to Martha, and when she saw these cats, she just loved them. So I gave her this wood carving, this set. I don't know if you can tell, but the cats have whiskers that are made out of toothbrush bristles. And I didn't try to detail. My style is not realism. That's not really what a cat's face looks like. The most difficult thing in the world to carve is a cat's head. It's a triangle, and try to make it look like a cat, I can't do that. So anyways, I gave these to Martha, and that's when I was in college, and many, many years later, I got a box in the mail, and she said, "I'm dying, and I wanted to make sure you got these back," because I didn't know what would happen, so she gave them back. But she enjoyed them for many, many years before that happened. This is a piece of white ash. That's what they make baseball bats out of. Very, very nice grain. Too hard to carve, by the way. I don't, the base, I use machines in making those bases. I don't carve those bases. Let's see. This is an unusual piece of wood, tiger striped walnut, which is just about unheard of. It's very, very rare. And then the base is tiger striped maple, hard maple, sugar maple. Anyway, carving it was pretty simple and straightforward until I tried to shape in between the front legs. I couldn't get the knife in there, and I don't use any kind of Dremel tool or any kind of power tool. So I couldn't do it. I couldn't get the knife in there, so on purpose I broke those legs off. I carved them into the shape I wanted. I glued them back on there, and how are you going to clamp that? I put heavy rubber bands around there, and if you look really close, you'll see a little glue line right there and a little glue line right there, but most people don't notice that unless I tell them. And here again, the base is wide enough so that the carving doesn't tip over. But I really like the tiger stripes in that piece of black walnut. Here's another carving made of walnut. It's not really my style. It's very stylized, but it's supposed to look like a deer. And I decided I wanted it to look like it was getting a drink of water. So the rings in the base are concentric rings around its nose, as if it was getting a drink of water. I did it a long time ago, 1988. If I was doing it now, the base would be more squared on the edge. I don't like the round over. But I do like the idea that it looks like it's getting a drink of water.
Weren't those legs hard to...
Yeah, they were. And then I had to drill them out and put steel pins inside so it wouldn't just break off the base. And drilling that was really risky because the drill bit could break out the side. But fortunately, that didn't happen. Let's see. Here's another one that's out on a pinnacle with lead in the base. This is from 1982. I used to over-exaggerate the key features of an animal on purpose. My style was never realism. So on this one I over-exaggerated the skinny legs. On this one I over-exaggerated the antlers or horns on it. It's a big horn sheep. And to carve a spiral is a lot more difficult than I realized. In fact, the first one I tried to carve, I failed. I had to junk it. The second one I tried to carve was a failure. So I went to the store and I bought a little can of Play-Doh, kids' Play-Doh, just modeling clay, and I made a couple of these out of Play-Doh. And that way I could see what they should look like from the top or the back or the side, and then I was able to carve those antlers and get them right. So the base is one piece, the body is another piece, the antlers are another piece, and then the ears are made separately. The original ears were small and round, and they were not the right shape for a sheep. Last winter, I carved a couple of dolphins. So I did this one last winter. And if you track down my Facebook page, I posted a video of my hands carving this dolphin. It's about a 10-minute video. If you're on my Facebook page and you go to the side where the pictures are, you should see that video as one of the options. Otherwise, you have to scroll through hundreds of posts to get back to December or January. But anyways, this is walnut, the wave is walnut, and the dolphin is butternut, and there's a wooden pin helping to hold them together, but it's not very strong. If I was to carry it around by the dolphin, it would eventually break off. It's part of the set. Here's the other one, sort of a matching set. Another thing you can see on my Facebook page, I have a wooden bench that I made on the east side of my living room. And when the sun's going down and it comes into the living room, these things cast shadows up on the wall, and I really like those shadows. And I got a pretty nice picture of the dolphin shadows, actually. That's one of the reasons I tend to keep them symmetrical, looking straight ahead rather than bent this way or that way, because if they're curved over, the shadow doesn't look right, and I like those shadows on the wall. So last winter I carved these dolphins. I carved that's a plesiosaur, it's a swimming dinosaur, and it's made out of aromatic red cedar, so every little chip was fragrant. The base is black walnut. The fish is made out of this green sumac wood, and the teeth are basswood. And then there's a wooden pin in here, and wooden pins in here. And that actually came out of this chunk of wood. I bought it on eBay. You can't just go to the store and buy a thick piece of red cedar lumber. No one has it. They don't have it at the lumber yard. They don't have it anywhere. So I looked around on eBay, and cedar wood is real soft. Should be easy to carve, right? Well, this one came from a rocky ridge top in Tennessee, and the tree was dead when it was cut. And who knows how long it stood there and dried, but it is not soft and easy to carve. It's very, very hard, but still really fragrant. That reminds me, I was going to pass this around so you could just take a look at it and make sure you smell it. It has a really good smell. This is a simplified elk or reindeer made out of Philippine mahogany. And the antlers are also made out of that same wood, but I wanted them to look different. So I soaked them overnight in a jar of bleach. And that's how I got the different color in the antlers. And then the base, I've done some of this. The shape of the base actually follows the 5 points. And that's why the base has that unusual shape. Our little penguins made out of walnut. Someday I'm going to glue together walnut and maple, black and white, and carve dolphins like that. And there's a little black and white bird called a junco that spends its winters here and its summers further north, and I want to do that and carve some juncos also. A little squirrel, I over-exaggerated the bushy tail. And this is a wood from Hawaii. I'm sorry I don't remember the name of it. And it was really hard to carve. I no longer carve extremely hard tropical woods. It's just too much. I no longer have the strength to pull the knife through the wood. I carve soft woods now. And I especially love cedar, just for the smell. Here's the rest of my plesiosaur family. So I carved all of these last winter. This one I carved the fins separate and glued them on. This one, the fins are part of the original block of wood. The nice thing about dinosaurs is that they usually don't have ears. And in carving, it's so incredibly difficult to make ears and eyes. It's outrageously difficult to get them straight across from each other and get the right shape. And, you know, with dinosaurs, We don't know if they had ears or not, because that cartilage didn't fossilize. So no one can say, hey, you got the wrong style of ears there. So let's see, that one has a story. All right, so this is a brontosaurus made out of catalpa. That's the tree that you see in people's yards with that big long beam that hangs on there, a big heart-shaped leaf. Yeah, that's right. Good fish bait. Yeah. And then the base is a tropical wood called lacewood. You can see the medullary rays that reflect light, depending on the angle of light. So it should look spotted to you. I did that in 1992.
Other than the hardness and just a different look, is there any other like valuable trait to carving a hardwood that would make you wish you could still carve hardwood?
Well, I could if I wanted to. It's just, and I'm not lazy, but you know, if like to carve that one squirrel, it would take me as long as it would take to carve all of these. So it just takes so long. But the beauty of the wood grain to me is fabulous. And so that kind of makes it worthwhile. But when I was younger, you know, it was kind of all muscle and it wasn't any trouble to drag that knife through there. That's not the case anymore. Oh, this one, I had a good friend, Tom Hantz, that went to Jamaica one winter. And I said, hey, bring me back a block of wood and I'll carve something out of it. You know, a piece of wood from Jamaica. And I was expecting a block of wood, but he brought back a piece of tree branch. It was about that big around, and maybe, I don't know, half a foot long. What are you supposed to carve out of a round tree branch? So, if you look at the top of this owl, you can see the center of the tree branch and the rings going around. It's a cylinder. I carved it out of a tree branch. And then, I wanted this to look like a dead tree, and most tree branches this size don't have any character to the bark. But witch hazel does. This is a witch hazel, which has nice character, even when it's very young. And I have a lot of subtle details that people don't notice unless I point them out. For example, on this one, I wanted it to look like a dead tree standing in the water. So at the base of the tree, it's round over here, but it has a stub of a branch over here. It's pointed over here. And if you look at the wood grain in the base, it's round here, and it's pointed over here. So it kind of looks like water rings or ice around the base of the tree. And then that base is designed so that even though it's top heavy, it's not going to tip over. Let's see. One of my favorite stories was with this Stegosaurus. This one probably took me longer than any carving. It's Honduran mahogany. The plates are tulip wood, not tulip tree, our state tree. That just kind of has a greenish, whitish greenish wood. This is a tropical wood, tulip wood. The spines are made from a big nut that grows on a palm tree. It's called a tegua nut. And it's so hard you can't really carve it. You have to scrape it. What I didn't know is that it's so oily, there isn't any glue in the world that will make it stick. So we just bump those a little bit and they want to fall off. That's with epoxy. The next time I have to glue those on, I'm going to use super glue. And then the base is walnut. When my son was a little kid, he's 28 or 29 now. When he was little and had just learned to read, he liked to read. He liked to read out loud. And one of my favorite memories is while I was carving that Stegosaurus, the little guy would sit on the corner of my desk. I have a big desk. And he would read to me from the book of Psalms. And, I would just carve away and he would read out loud. And a lot of the Psalms have an exclamation at the end. The word is Selah. No one knows what it means. It has an exclamation point. So I remember that little kid, he would read the Psalm, and then when he would get to the end, he'd go, Selah, and he would kind of jump a little bit. And it's just a favorite memory of mine. This is a kiwi. It's a flightless bird of Australia. They do have little rudimentary wings, but I decided not to bother with that. Again, it's not realism. And then a lot of bird carvers use wire, some kind of metal for the feet and the legs, but I carved, that's all wood, I carved all that. And I sort of blackened it and dotted it with a wood burning tool. And then the shape of the base follows these 3 points. But it also follows what the wood grain is doing. If you look at the curves in the wood grain, I followed those curves with the shape, the outline shape. This is a ladybug, but you can't tell anymore. When I first carved it, it was bright orange with a little bit of black. It's a wood called cocobolo. I didn't know that cocobolo would darken with age. So now it's still got a hint of orange in it, but it was bright orange when I made it. And this is butternut, beautiful golden color. 1991, I think that.
You don't stain any of your pieces, right? This is just a
Rarely.
natural finish?
Yeah, I like the beauty of the wood. This one I did stain, and then the grizzly bear I stained. That's pretty much it. The rest, well, I have another one here that's stained too, but it's rare that I do that. And I guess I don't do it anymore. It's just, I tried it a few times a long time ago. This was an old one that I carved, I don't know, in the 1970s. And it got broken, the teeth got knocked out, the claws got broken off, the tail got broken. And so it just kind of laid around in pieces until last winter. And then the head was round, and I didn't realize that, hey, cats do not have round heads, their heads are triangular. So I reshaped the heads a little bit more triangular. It's still too round on top, it should have been flatter on top. But I gave it new claws, new teeth, which are too big. But prehistoric cats, though, had huge teeth like that. And then I put a wooden pin in the tail to help hold it together. So that's one that I reshaped. And I resanded the whole thing. It was very poorly sanded. So I put a bunch of hours into sanding it again. And then it still had dark places, so I had to stain it again. Anyway, so it's kind of one of the old junkers that I tried to fix up. It's not up to my current level of quality, but at least I didn't throw it away. So that's good. One of my favorites, and it has a nice story, is my Loch Ness Monster. I really love this one. It's black walnut on a red oak base, and this is from a place where two big limbs came together, and so the grain swirled around in all directions, but it's very, very hard wood, very difficult to carve. There was a little kid named Nathan Miller at my school 4 or 5 years ago. His dad was the former pastor at the Salem Church, and they eventually moved to Kokomo. Well, every day this little kid would bring in these drawings of Godzilla monsters stepping on buildings and knocking over railroads. And the drawings were surprisingly good. And I'm not that good at drawing. And I had been messing around with drawings of Loch Ness monsters for a while, and I didn't have anything I liked. So I said, hey Nate, can you draw a Loch Ness monster that disappears into the water and then it reappears over here? I thought it might take him a few weeks or a month. And he came in the next day, here you go. So I carved it. I carved it based on his drawing. And the Shrek movie had just come out, and Shrek has these funny ears that look like little funnels. And I remember the kid saying, well, you know, if it's going to go underwater, I think it might have ears like Shrek. So his drawing had ears like that. So I thought, I'm going to stay with his drawing. That's what I did. And this one, when sunlight hits it, it kind of goes into the wood and reflects, and it looks really beautiful. And this one casts a really nice shadow on the wall, too. To carve these, I didn't carve them at all. I took a little walnut dowel rod and I stuck it in a drill and I locked it on so it would stay running, and I put that in a vise so it would stay put, and then I took a little tiny chisel and file and I scraped and scraped while it was spinning like a lathe, like a little tiny mini lathe, and I turned those little ears in a spinning drill. And then I glued them on, and it worked. I guess I could have carved them, but it would have been tough to do. Here's my great horned owl. My wife told me not to use that wood for a base because it would get dust on it and it would be very difficult to get dust out. But what did she know? I'm a wood carver. And she was right. It's really difficult to keep this thing clean. Anyways, it's made of walnut, and I'm not a bird carver. There are bird carvers who will get every feather and every little vein of every feather. That's not my style. I'll let them do that. And then when I did the carving, I did it without feet. And then several years ago, I did a display of my carvings, and I thought, you know, people are going to notice that I don't have feet. So I carved feet, and I glued them on there. But how do you carve something that small? How do you hold on to it while you're carving? And the same is true of ears. The horse, I made those ears separate. This one, I made the ears separate. This one, I made the ears separate. And there's no way to hold that little tiny piece of wood and carve it. So what I do is I take a little strip of wood. So I've got something to hold on to, and at the very end of it, I carve the ear, still attached, get it all sanded, hollowed out, all done, and then I cut it off. And then glue it on there. It works. This is my giraffe from 1987. The wood was bright lemon yellow when I cut it. It's from the hedge tree, or Osage orange. In the early years of farming in this country, farmers would plant what they called a hedge tree, one right next to the other, and it made a living fence. And it's a spiny, thorny tree. And it has these big green, they look like big green grapefruits on there. But the wood is bright lemon yellow when you first cut it. But what I didn't know is that the wood darkens with age. And by the way, that tree grew naturally in the Mississippi region, and the branches grew in nice arches about this long. And if you look at an Osage orange or hedge tree, it has arch and arch and arch. Native Americans preferred that for their hunting bow. These weren't long bows now, they were little bows like this, but it's very tough and very springy. The French fur trappers that came through called it bois d'arc, wood of arc. And that's what that's made of. It was tough to carve. It's a very tough, hard wood. The belt buckle is made out of cedar. I did the drawing myself. It's a white oak, leaf and acorns. Did all the carving, sanded the background, got it all done. And when you look at it, you literally couldn't see the leaf and the acorns. So I took a little 8-penny nail and I started tapping and tapping and tapping, making little dents to give it a texture back there. And I didn't know if it would work, but I had to do something. So I don't know how many dents I put in there, but it worked. Now the leaf and the acorn actually show up. And I don't wear it. In fact, I glued a little block on the back just so that I could display it, so it would stand up for a display. I did wear it when I was a kid. I carved it when I was a kid, but I don't wear it anymore. This little rabbit is made out of butternut. Did this in 1977. Another one. Now those little ones go quick. I could carve one of those in a few hours, whereas the big ones take 30, 40 hours to get done. One of my favorite memories, I'm not a lover of snakes or anything, but I carved this snake out of sumac wood when I was sitting on a riverbank, just looking at a beautiful river. And I had cut a branch from a tree and carved it with my pocket knife while I was sitting on the riverbank. And I got it all done except for the sanding. I did that back at home. But it still brings back a memory of that day. Just very peaceful, relaxing time. This is butternut again with a knot from a pine board for a base. And I learn a lot about animals too. For example, sometimes you see an old movie and a camel has 2 bumps. And then you see a picture of a camel that only has 1 bump. Well, does it have 2 or 1? And I learned that the Arabian camel has 1 bump, but the Bactrian camel has 2 bumps. There are 2 different kinds of camels. I would have never known that without wood carving. Another kiwi. This is the same style as that bigger one. This is made out of ebony, the black wood from the tropics that they used to make the black piano keys out of. Very hard, very dense, but prone to cracking. I didn't know that at the time. And this one is actually broken in many places and had to be glued back together. A lot of sculptors and carvers say that when they look at a piece of stone, soapstone or wood or whatever, they can see the character, they can see the image in the wood. And I've never had that experience. And generally, carving is not easy for me. It's actually very difficult. It's a challenge. But I like doing it. I especially like carving in the wintertime when I'm stuck in the house. I have a big desk by a window in our house, and when there's a snowstorm going, I like to open those windows because then it's really bright and I can see what I'm doing very clearly. And otherwise I'd be miserable because I'm stuck in the house. I like to be out hiking and fishing and exploring. When I'm stuck in the house, I need to be busy with something fun. And I never really got into television. So I need something to help me get through winter. So this is what I do in the wintertime. Back to that seeing the image in the wood, I've never really experienced that, except one time I was breaking up some firewood sticks, and I saw this stick and I thought, that looks like a figure skater spinning around. So I sanded it and put it on a base. That's the only time that's ever happened. Other than that figure skater, I have never seen the image in the board at all. Back to this buying wood on eBay. I always have to watch what I'm doing because sometimes there are cracks, and I have to work around through the cracks. So I usually highlight the cracks with chalk so I can see what I need to avoid, and then I'll come up with a design that sort of works around those cracks. I don't like it when I carve something and put 30, 40 hours into it and then it splits. That's very disappointing. This gray piece of wood is buckeye, which grows naturally in Indiana. And the wood is gray, but it's very light, very soft, not really used for furniture or much of anything. But I carved an Eeyore for my sister-in-law. She likes Winnie the Pooh characters, and when she got her nursing degree, it was kind of a big deal, so I carved an Eeyore. I meant to borrow it, forgot to go get it, but it's gray. And then Eeyore's nose is white, and this, wherever I got Eeyore from out of this board, there was a bit of a white streak. So on my carving, it's actually got a white nose. So that's most of it. I think I've shown you all the carvings. I've done many more, probably 2 or 3 times this many, but these are the better ones, I'll have to admit that. They're the best ones I have.
Do you keep them all?
I did, but last fall, or maybe a year before that, I moved my study from the basement to my son's old room. And in that process, I threw away a lot of stuff.
But you don't sell them?
I don't sell them because they take too long to make. If I do a carving that takes 30 hours, you know, people don't want to even pay minimum wage for that. I feel like it's a level of skill that might be worth something. But in addition, I just like to look at them. We decorate our house with them. They're all around the living room. And to me anyways, it's just fun to sit and look, and you know, each one has a story, and there are many memories wrapped up in these, and I just like to sit and gaze, contemplate, enjoy the shadows on the wall. But it makes a very unusual decoration for our house, and I like that a lot. So, yeah. I did sell some when I was a kid and had no money whatsoever. I used to sell. And I sold some beautiful carvings for next to nothing. I really regret doing that. But, you know, when you have no money and you've never had any, you know, a small amount seems like a big deal, so I did it.
Did those carvings have your name on them or not?
They would have my initials burned on the bottom, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And who knows where they ended up.
I'm
Any
curious,
questions?
are you with the same wife with all this carvings and so on?
You know, I am. We've been married 32 years, and I was carving way before we were, oh, I forgot one. It's up on a shelf in our room. I carved her a teddy bear when we were dating. And then I got that really thick yarn, and I tied a bow around its neck. I forgot to bring that. But anyways, my wife was very understanding. I try not to make a mess of the house. So I have a study and a big desk where I do my carving. And I have a little desk lamp so I can put that lamp right on so I can really see what I'm doing. And I put a big beach towel on the floor because I make a lot of chips. But you know, those chips, they get caught in my socks. And they end up down the hallway, and they end up all over the house. So we're constantly vacuuming, and she's very understanding about it. So I'm lucky, yes.
What do you rub them with to get them shiny?
Um,
Is it an oil?
Well,
or just-
I use a clear lacquer finish that I spray on.
Oh, you spray it on?
Yeah, you can buy it in a spray can. It's Deft Clear Wood Finish.
Okay.
I sand them like crazy because finish will not hide any blemish. In fact, it brings it out. So I've learned to sand very, very thoroughly. Part of my style is I don't want a single knife mark or any trace of tooling that I did. I want it to look like it grew that way. And it takes a lot of sanding. In a 30-hour wood carving, there's probably 10 or 15 hours of carving and another 15 hours of sanding. And some wood carvers don't do that. They leave knife marks all over, but that's not my style. But I spray the finish on. You know, that way it goes on nice and even. And then I sometimes, you know, I get a little over-eager, put it on too thick, and it runs. So guess what I have to do? I have to sand it back down. Yeah, and I do that. But to me, that's part of craftsmanship. If you're going to call yourself a craftsman, you're still going to make mistakes. But you've got to have the willingness to do whatever it takes to fix that mistake.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Some of the old ones, in fact, most of the old ones, were not up to this level of quality. And I've gone back years later and resanded and reshaped and refinished them to bring them up to my current level.
Do you catalog them, photograph them, and?
I guess I have pictures of most of them, but I haven't made a serious effort to do that. I probably should.
Do you ever go out to the wood carving show?
That always comes up. It seems like every summer I'm busy that weekend, and I haven't been there.
We have a friend that goes there. She's quite active in it.
Okay.
For our, let me see, our 50th anniversary and our 60th, she carved us something.
Oh, nice.
One was a totem pole.
Oh,
The
wow.
other two were little dogs.
Yeah, very nice. There's a wood carving show in Portage each spring in April. It's the Duneland Wood Carvers, but people come from Ohio, Michigan, Illinois, Wisconsin, and it's a big event. And it's where I get unusual blocks. Now this one I actually bought on eBay, but there was a guy from Wisconsin, a man and wife, that had huge blocks of butternut. And a lot of these are butternut. I love to carve butternut. And big, thick slabs. Really expensive too. And I bought lots of them. And when I look at that thick slab of wood, just like this right here, I just can't wait for winter. I just can't wait to get going on that. I'd rather have this than a bag of candy or something like that. I just,
Do you already know what you're gonna carve out of that?
I'm not gonna do this plesiosaur. I've got 3 of those, that's enough. So I haven't decided yet, but I'll definitely make
Would
something.
it be some?
I know I'm gonna carve some sea turtles this winter. Probably a whole family of them. When they're babies, their shells are very flat, and they just look so cute that I think I'd like to carve a sea turtle. And I have this wood called laced wood that one of the, maybe a few of those had this for the base. It has these spots. They're the medullary rays of the tree. And anyways,
What's that called?
laced wood is somewhere from the tropics. And those little spots, they're part of the structure of the wood, medullary rays. So they would show up no matter how you carve. But I cut a little piece and sliced it, and I dropped it in bleach overnight to see what it would look like after it was bleached. I wanted to see if the spots would still show up. Well, the wood turned a light gray and the spots turned white, pure white. And I thought, boy, that might make a really nice sea turtle if I carved it out of that. It would have these speckles all over the shell. So I'm going to try that. But this isn't really thick enough. There's a place in Roseland called Johnson's Workbench that sells tropical hardwoods. And my environmental ethic doesn't allow me to buy large pieces of tropical hardwood, but I'll buy those little cut-off scraps. I don't feel like I'm contributing to destroying the tropical forest. But anyways, yeah, I want to carve some sea turtles out of lace wood. And I did carve a turtle another time. I had a manzanita burl from California that an old man gave me when I was a kid. He saw my carvings at a library where I grew up. And he tracked me down, he said, and it was a burl of manzanita, and it was just a knobby chunk of wood, so the grain inside there went every which way. And it was very difficult, but I carved a turtle shell out of it, and then I made the head and the legs out of some other wood, and I glued them underneath there. But, oh man, it looked so bad. The legs were way too long, so it was way up in the air. It had this gigantic, goofy smile. It looked terrible. So I got rid of that. But yeah, that was my only try at carving a turtle. But now I'm carving a turtle out of all one piece of wood.
What do you start from? Do you start from photo references, or you mentioned the hillbilly was specifically somebody's design?
Yeah, that was when I was younger. I needed an outline drawing. Now I can just start carving and carve what I want to carve. But when I first started out, I needed at least an outline shape. And sometimes I would get those from my son's coloring books when he was little. Like this Stegosaurus, actually. There was a drawing in his coloring book, but the tail was up in the air, and I thought, well, that's going to break off. So I redesigned it so the tail would curve down and touch the base, so that could be glued to the base also. Yeah, it used to be that I needed some sort of a drawing or a picture. The dolphins that I carved last winter, I just looked for dolphin pictures. I just Googled, just ran an image search. And eventually I found some pictures that I like. And these are not exact duplicates of the pictures, but at least I could see what a dolphin's tail looked like, because I didn't really know what that, and by the way, a dolphin's tail is horizontal. But I wanted it to cast a shadow, and I thought the shadow wouldn't look right, so I tipped it. I thought I could get away with tipping it part way. If I went all the way to vertical, I thought some kid at school would say, hey, you got the tail wrong on that dolphin. So both of these, the tail is tipped part way.
While you're carving, are you making an outline on the wood of the shape you want to go, or is it all in your head?
I generally just start carving and I just You know, I guess I'll put a fin here, so I start carving. I guess I need a leg here, so I'll start carving that.
Okay.
But it doesn't always work out. Sometimes I make mistakes that are irrevocable, and they go in the campfire. Not very often though, because I don't like to invest 20 hours and then mess it up. So I try to really watch what I'm doing. And I do draw out things a lot, and I'll make different drawings and tape them. I have my desk, and then I have a file cabinet and a file cabinet, which I built all of it, and I'll tape these drawings all around me, so I can look at my sketch of the top view and my sketch of the end and so on, and I can kind of get an idea.
You mentioned doing a video,
Yeah.
and of course you're a high school teacher. Have you specifically taught woodworking? I mean, this
Carving?
carving?
Well, it was never part of the curriculum, so I couldn't teach it as part of school. But one year, I had a bunch of kids. I don't want to brag, but I excelled with low achievers during my career. And I always wanted to help them do better. And I wanted to encourage them and be their friend, and I think I did that reasonably well. Well, one year there were a bunch of kids who, they'd been in all kinds of trouble and had trouble in most of their classes, but they had seen my wood carvings and they kept bugging me to teach them how to do it. And so I told them the only way we can do this is if we meet after school, a couple days a week. So I went to the store and I bought a series of this same knife, and I taped the handle of each one and I put the kid's name on there because I didn't want them getting each other's blood. I didn't want them getting cut. So they were only allowed to use their own knife, nobody else's. And I took a bandsaw and I sawed the outline of decoy ducks because it's really easy to carve a decoy duck. There's no skinny legs, there's no ears, I used butternut because it's just so nice to carve. And so we would meet after school 2 days a week, but I had an ulterior motive. While we sat and carved, I just wanted to say things that they might hear. I didn't lecture them because they'll turn off like a light switch. But I would just say things like, I really love hard work. I like the satisfaction of knowing I did my best. And I like doing my best at everything I do. And there's nothing greater than at the end of the day knowing that, I gave it an honest effort today. And I wasn't telling them to turn their life around. I was just randomly saying things that, hoping they would hear that and go home and think, I think I'll try that too. So I had a definite ulterior motive. They were successful with their decoy ducks. They were shocked at how difficult it was to pull the knife through the wood. They thought it was just going to be like so. And some of the skinnier kids, they'd be like, ow, my arm hurts. But we were successful. And that was the only time I taught kids at school. I had a roommate in college who was fascinated. I took some down to display down there. And he was a bird watcher. And I taught him to carve. He carved a seagull with the wings out. And it came out beautiful. I don't know if he's still got it, but that's pretty much the only teaching I've ever done related to carving. But another thing I always did at school, during the first week of a class, I would bring my carvings in and I would go through them a whole lot quicker than I did today. But I did that for a couple reasons. First of all, I wanted the kids to trust me that I knew what I was talking about, sort of to establish credibility. But also, I would talk to them about doing your best at whatever you're doing, whether it's English, math, football, basketball, mowing the lawn for your neighbor, whatever you're doing, why not give it your best effort? Give it an honest effort, because a lot of times you'll be surprised at how good things come out. And then you can look back and you can say, wow, I actually did my best, and it worked out. But I would also tell them that there are many other wood carvers in the world who do way better than I do. Way more detail, very impressive. But I can honestly say that on each one of these, I did the best I could. I don't have to say, well, it'd be better if I would have tried. It'd be better if I would have taken my time. That's not true. On every one of these, I did the best I could possibly do, and I know that. So I can sort of, take satisfaction in that. And a lot of kids at school, later in the year or later in their school career, they would say, I'll never forget when you brought those wood carvings in and you talked about doing your best. I decided that maybe I could do my best too. And so they kind of helped me establish myself at the beginning of the school year. I taught 33 years, just retired. Any other questions? Yeah.
Your carving knife, do you use several different kinds or just basically one?
No, just where is it? Just this. And every now and then I need a little bit longer blade, so I'll use that,
Yeah.
like for face planing on a flat surface. And X-Acto knife blades are surprisingly good steel. I can even do this if I need to reach way out. I've got the blade barely in the handle now. You would think it would just snap off. It doesn't. It works. That's pretty much it. That and the rifflers, that's all I use. Now occasionally I'll have to drill a hole or use a file or something to get in some little crevice that the knife, where the knife just won't go in there. But pretty much it's just this knife right here. And if you track down my video on Facebook, you'll see that. You'll see me using that knife only, and I'm carving this one right here. And it's very rough in the video, not anywhere close to
I don't think you said, what age were you actually when you tried to carve that swan? That
I don't
first one?
remember. I was probably about 10 years old, though. I was building model cars, but I was ready to move on to something more outdoorsy. And like I said, we didn't have a garage or a shop or any kind of tools, but I had that X-Acto knife and I had a pocket knife. And so I just thought, I'd pretend I was Daniel Boone and whittle. And I was whittling sticks and all kinds of things too. I thought I was Daniel Boone. I had a bow, a target bow, just a little bitty kid's target bow, and I would walk around the woods with that thing. I never shot anything, and luckily I never ran afoul of a DNR officer. So, but I guess I was 10 or 12 years old. I don't really know though. I've lost track of when I was.
Is there something specific about animals? I see you don't try to carve, say, sports cars or anything like that.
Yeah, I was a lover of wildlife when I was a kid, and I've kind of stuck with that. Although now I've really gone to dinosaurs because I get a lot of freedom of design. Nobody can say, well, hey, that's not how their feet look. Because all we have is a stone record of their bones. And another thing is, I don't enjoy difficult carvings. Like this hillbilly banjo player, with all the little crevices and all the little details, it was really hard to do that. My carvings now are very flowing, smooth forms, like this one, this one, this one, that one, that one, that one. There's kind of a difference. Do you see that? They used to be more detailed. Now they're way less detailed. Honestly, I'm not getting lazy. It's just difficult to pull that knife through the wood. So it's a little bit easier to do those free forms. Plus, it's just a style that I happen to like now. I guess my style has changed over the years. I was kind of trying out different things. But yeah, like the banjo player, I would never try to do a detailed carving like that anymore. It would take me so long. But when I did that, I was carving constantly, and so I had gotten really good at it. And I felt like I could carve anything. But then I sat out several years, or maybe I did one carving a winter, kind of got rusty. So, yeah. I don't even know if I could do this. I guess I could, but I don't feel like
Sounds like a
spending a
nice
year
job.
making one. Well, any other questions? Well, thank you very much. It means a lot to me that you guys took time out of your day to come up. I appreciate it. You're welcome. Oh, thanks. Oh, wow. Thank you.
Well, don't get real excited.
That's okay. Hey,